This video covers Chapter 4, specifically short sales and the margin associated with short sale transactions. Now, short sales occur when you sell a stock first and you buy it back later. So you short, let's use ExxonMobil as an example. ExxonMobil is about $90 a share right now. You think it's overpriced. You know, the oil market has dropped. The price of oil is half of what it was back in September when it was over $100. It was around $100 a barrel. Now it's below 50, and so the oil market's getting beat up. You suspect that oil company stocks are going to drop even further. So you look at ExxonMobil as being going to continue to tank. So you're bearish on ExxonMobil, you're looking at the price of $90 and you're saying, man, I expect it to go down even more and I want to profit from it. So that's the setup for a short sale. You got to be bearish. And so you intend to short sell, sell the stock at 90, and let's say you expect it to drop all the way down to $75 a share. That's what you expect. Okay, so you expect to make a capital gain of $15 per share on this transaction. Now, you might ask, how can you sell something you don't own? And that's an interesting question. It's a good question. But what happens is when you short sell, as I mentioned in class, you short sell, you borrow shares from your broker. Now, your broker gets those shares from one of two places. Your broker, if you have a big broker, like say Merrill Lynch, for example, then Merrill Lynch might take those shares out of somebody else's account who owns ExxonMobil, take the shares out of the account, unbeknownst to them. The people who are long those shares won't know those shares are being taken out. They'll basically fork them over to you in a sense. You know, the broker controls the whole transaction, so you don't actually physically get the shares and the certificates, but you're basically, the broker gives the shares over to you, and the broker in turn sells those shares to a third party. Okay? Now that's one way that the broker will get them is through somebody's account that the broker has in their possession. The second method is there's an entire market out there for short sale shares, so that when brokers and people want to short sell something, they may not have the shares in a brokerage account. They can borrow those shares through a special market. So either way, it doesn't matter which way. We don't really care in this class how your broker gets those shares, but your broker borrows those shares either in a market or gets them out of somebody else's account, basically gives them to you in a sense. I have to be careful. You know, they don't actually give them to you. Like I said, the broker controls it. So the broker basically takes those shares and sells them for you and puts the proceeds in an account. So the broker has control of the transaction. Brokers are not dumb. They would never let you borrow shares and you physically take the shares and sell them on your own. So the broker is going to control the transaction and keep the proceeds in the account. Okay. So now many people still are bothered by this idea of borrowing shares from somebody else's account, but it's really, you're already used to it. You don't even realize it. Think about it. When you go to a bank, let's say you deposit a nice crisp $100 bill. You look at the serial number and you hand it over to the teller, and you know it's going to get deposited in your checking account. And you know in maybe a year from now, you're going to withdraw that $100 out of your account. Now, do you expect that $100 bill to stay in that account and you are going to get that exact bill back from the teller when you want to withdraw your money? And the answer is no, you don't expect that. And what do you expect to actually happen with that money? Well, let's see. Banks in business that make money and they lend. So what are they going to do? They're going to take that money that you deposit, pool it with other money, and they're going to lend it out to another party, and you know, collect on that loan eventually. And you know, you don't even really see it or know what's going on behind the scenes with your account, but that money is technically not there in your account. I mean, it's recorded there, but you know the money, the actual physical money, has been lent out somewhere. It's the same type of concept here. Your shares, if you own, now you're long, for example, somebody's long ExxonMobil, those shares could be pulled out of their account and lent to another party through a short sales transaction. So don't let short sales bother you. It is a little twisted in its ways, because you're selling first and then buying it back later in reverse chronological order from what you're used to, where you're used to buying low and selling high. Here you're selling high and buying low. Now, with that background set, one thing you need to keep in mind is that when you short sell a stock and that those shares are no longer in that other person's account, you are responsible as the short seller for the dividends that stock throws off. In other words, the dividends that stock pays. Because your broker took those shares and sold them to a third party, and whoever bought those shares is going to actually get the dividend. The person's account that those shares were taken out of, they're not going to get the dividend. You need to make them whole. So when you short sell a stock, you're going to be responsible for the dividends. And by the way, for the most part, you can't really short sell bonds. I guess you could do it at an institutional level, but very few people do, because you'd be responsible for the coupon interest, and that coupon interest would just stack up and stack up. So at a retail level, you can't short bonds. There's other methods. Talk to me in class about how to take a short position in bond type instruments, but you can't short sell a bond. Institutionals will do it, but they tend not to do it either, because of that responsibility of the coupon payments. Okay, so let's make this a little more concrete, this example here. So let's say you short you short ExxonMobil at $90 a share, and you do 100 shares, and so you're going to have sales proceeds of $9,000. Okay, let's say you buy the shares back, or you expect to buy it back, so you're going to have a negative $7,500 to buy the shares back. That's your cost. And then don't forget, now there's dividends associated with ExxonMobil. It's a big company, and if you look it up on the web, you'll find that it pays, ExxonMobil pays $2.76 per share per year. And so if you short sell this stock, say over a year, then you're going to have $276 in dividends that you're going to have to be responsible for. And so your overall profit is going to be $1,224 on this transaction. Okay, so now what we want to do is, now we just covered the basics of short sales, how you got there, what they're about, but now we want to look at the margin associated with short sales, and it's a little more, slightly more complicated, only because short selling is less intuitive than buying and going long a stock. So now here's our example. We're shorting ExxonMobil. It's at $90 a share. So we're going to assume the initial margin requirement of your broker is 50%, and that maintenance margin is 30%. Okay? And that's what we're going to start out with. Those are our assumptions. Now, here's the rules with short sale margin. Short sale margin, the margin requirement is that you must keep 100% of the proceeds in the account. Okay, so your broker has his account. All the proceeds from the sale must stay in the account under the broker's control. Plus, you need to deposit 50% of the sales proceeds on top of that. So that's your skin in the game. Your skin in the game is that margin deposit of 50%. Okay, so let's do the calculation. So our margin is going to equal, let's look at we want the equity. Remember, we want equity divided by market value. Okay, and so here we have $9,000 in sales proceeds from the selling the 100 shares plus 4,500, which is 50% of the 9,000. Okay, all that sits in an account. It's basically on the asset side of your balance sheet. Now minus the liability that's involved here. Now here's the trick with short sale margin. The liability is not the dollars that you owe, but it's the shares that you have to buy back. Okay, so the value of the shares that you have to buy back to cover the short position is your liability. So you're really not borrowing money per se like you did when you purchased long stock and you wanted to do margin. Here you're borrowing shares, which do have a value and do translate to dollars, but focus on the fact that you've borrowed shares. And so here the shares, you got 100 shares times $90 a share. Okay, so that's $9,000 right here in terms of a liability. And what's the market value that you have here? The market value of what you have is the 100 shares times 90. Okay, at this point, that's the market value of your assets borrowed. So that turns out to be 50.50. Okay, so what I just did was I showed you that by depositing 50% of the proceeds, I've met the margin requirement of 50%, and I just showed you that margin, like we saw with going long in a long position, margin is made up of your equity divided by the market value of your assets. Okay. Now let's look at another question here. At what price would you get a house call? Now remember, you get a house call when you purchase a stock. When the stock drops in value, the collateral is now worth less when you own a stock. But when you short a stock, your liability goes up when the stock price goes up. So when you short a stock, the last thing you want to happen is you want the stock to go up. And when the stock goes up, your liability goes up, your equity goes down, and you're likely to get a house call. So the maintenance margin is 30% here. So we want to figure out the price at which you will get a house call. So you have the 30% maintenance. The value in your account still is $13,500 at this point. Okay, minus your liability. And your liability here is going to be 100 shares times P. P is the price, and we're going to solve for P to figure out the price at which you get a house call, the point at which you get 30% margin, equity in other words. And we're going to divide this by 100 shares times P, okay, the market value of those assets. Now, we're going to solve for P. So you use the basic trick. That's dividing by 1, doesn't do anything. You cross multiply and set equal. So this is basically 30P equals 13,500 minus 100P, and that's 130P equals 13,500. P equals 103.85. That makes sense, right? It makes sense that the price at which you get a house call is above the $90 in which you shorted it at. Okay, so it's got to go up about $13.85 before you get a house call. So that's where you're going to get your house call, at 103. Okay, so now let's say the stock reaches 103, you get a house call. How much money do you need to deposit to get the account back up to the initial of 50%? Right here, 50% initial. Okay. Well, you need a 50% margin requirement. You need 50% equity. Okay. Now, the thing is, you need an account balance. I'll just call it AC. That's the symbol we're going to solve for. Your account balance. you have a liability at this point because the stock went up and it's worth $103.85. So the value of your shares are 10,000. The value of your liability in terms of shares is $10,385 divided by the value 385. And again, now solve for AC, cross multiply, and set equal. And so this is your value in your account balance needs to be 15,578. Okay, that's how much money you need in your account in order to get the equity back up to 50%. Okay, it's at 30. You want to get it up to 50, so you're going to need $15,578 in your account. So therefore, what is the amount of the house call? Okay, we're almost done. Okay, you now need in the account 15,578. You had, I guess that's the best way you could do it. So you had 13,500, right? So therefore, you need the deposit. Call this deposit. You need to deposit $2,078 right now. Now, a couple of points. So that's your house call. Your house call is $278. When you deposit that much money in the account, you get it up to 50%, and everybody's happy. Your broker's not too nervous at that point. A couple of things in the discussion here. One, I assume that the drop in the stock price was immediate, so we really didn't have to bother to calculate interest expense associated with what's going on here when you borrow money, and that applies to here, but it also applies even to the long positions that we talked about, the margin there. Also, this happened so fast. In other words, I assume that the stock price went up immediately after we purchased it. There was no chance for any dividends to come into play, so I basically ignored that in the analysis. And there's one other thing not tied to this example, but you should be aware of, and that's there's an uptick rule associated with short selling, and the uptick rule goes like this. When a stock is dropping and dropping and dropping, there tends to be historically people who pile on and want to short sell a stock and push the stock down even further. In other words, there's kind of like a panic, or there even could be an organized panic where you have short sellers who are ganging up on a stock and trying to force the stock price down. And when you short sell, you push the stock, you give the stock even more momentum when it's dropping. Remember that idea of momentum. So when a stock is dropping and you short sell, you're selling the shares, you're pushing the stock down even further. Now, for many, many years, there's been an uptick rule. And the uptick, a tick is a change in the stock price. You know, if the stock goes up or it goes down, it's called a tick. So you can have a tick down or a tick up. There was an uptick rule for many years in this country that said in order for a stock to be shorted, the last price change had to be an uptick. So you couldn't short a stock that its last price change was a drop. You had to wait for a movement up in the stock, and as soon as you got a movement in the stock, you were allowed to short sell. And that probably forced the price down a little bit. And then the next trader would have to wait until there was an uptick again to be able to short. That prevents people from piling on and pushing and pushing and pushing and adding momentum on the downside to a stock. That uptick rule has been slightly modified. First of all, it was totally done away with around 2000. I guess in the 2007s, 2008, somewhere in that time frame, the uptick rule had been discarded. The Securities and Exchange Commission thought that it didn't have any value, and so they got rid of it. There were people in Wall Street who actually begged for it to come back because they knew that people would gang up on stocks and try to drive it down. And that's exactly what we saw in 2008, in the 2008 financial panic, people ganging up on stocks. And so subsequent, I guess around 2010, the Securities and Exchange Commission reinstated the uptick rule, but reinstated the rule so that only stocks that have fallen more than 10% from the preceding day are subject to the uptick rule. So you have to have a stock that's taking a beating, so to speak, a beating by 10%, and then an uptick rule comes into play. But if a stock is only down slightly for the day, there is no uptick rule as of now. So that gives you some background on short selling, margin, and the uptick rule.